Am I on?
Yes, saw you.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Timothy Nelson, who was named the Artistic Director of In-Series in the spring of 2018. Having founded and led American Opera Theater, he went on to maintain a career as director, designer, and conductor in Europe and North America, serving as artistic director of the Netherlands Opera Studio and the Nieuwe Stemmen program of the Rotterdam Operadagen, and creating productions for London's Barbican, English touring opera, the Nationale Reisopera, Academy of Ancient Music, Iford Arts Festival, Brooklyn Academy of Music, and others. He has been called by the New York Times the future of opera. On the personal side, Timothy was born and raised and took his initial schooling and training in West Virginia. He is a graduate of Peabody Institute and has a master's from Goucher. And on a personal side of things, Timothy recently adopted Buddy, a Labrador mutt, and he started learning to play the hammered dulcimer, and he speaks Dutch. Was that good?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you, Jonas, and thank all of you for having me today. Especially thank you, Suzanne, for having thought to invite me. I'm going to share several histories today, some personal histories, our organizational history, and also some history about the industry, the art form that I work in. I haven't timed myself, so I'm a little worried that I might run long. So I'm going to be watching the clock, and I apologize if I don't get to everything or if I speak a little fast. And then I'm gonna leave some time at the end for questions. And Jonas might have said it, but feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along as you think of them. As Monica said, my name is Timothy Nelson, and I'm the artistic director of something called In-Series, which is a DC-based opera theater company that will this year celebrate its 40th anniversary. We'll be 40 years old this year. And I took over the artistic leadership of this company in 2018 from its founder, who is a woman named Carla Hubner. And Carla is a magnificent Chilean pianist who in her career specialized in contemporary music and performed all over the world before settling here in DC and becoming a faculty member of what was then Mount Vernon College. When she took over the faculty position, she was asked to start a concert series in the chapel, which is called the Hand Chapel at Mount Vernon College. And that's the genesis of the company I now lead, In-Series. And part of our DNA is tied up in those early years. I'm going to talk a lot today about a quote by Rumi, which goes, there's always a great mutual embrace happening between essence and accident. And a lot of our DNA as an organization is tied up in happy accidents or things that were done unintentionally that really formed who we are as a company. And one of those is that Carla was open to doing the thing that she didn't know how to do. Whatever it was, it didn't limit her that she didn't necessarily know how to do it. She was willing to try and to do it with people that she loved and trusted. So in those early years when she was running a concert series, she would often think, oh, I know some actors and I love this poetry, so we'll mix these Schubert songs with some poetry read by these actors. And then a dance company would say, oh, we don't have space this year because our theater is being renovated. And she said, oh, come join the concert. So very quickly, this concert series bloomed and blossomed into something larger that was doing performing arts happenings. And this was in the early 1980s. And one of the things they started doing was staging chamber operas, particularly the operas of Mozart. But they were doing them in rather unconventional ways, as Suzanne can tell you. And some of these included like Marriage of Figaro set in Las Vegas, and a production of Così fan tutte that happens in the early days of Hollywood. And if any of you know a little bit about the history of opera as an industry in America in the latter half of the 20th century, there's a director named Peter Sellers, who really, who in DC, you may know because when he was 19, he became the director of what was the National Theater Company at the Kennedy Center. And he became famous for staging a set of De Ponte operas, the Mozart De Ponte operas, and doing them in what was then considered radical ways. So the Figaro was set in Trump Tower, and the Così fan tutte was set in Despina's Diner on Cape Cod, I think. And then the most famous was the Don Giovanni that was set in Spanish Harlem. This was exactly the same time that Carla was doing these same sort of approaches to the Mozart operas at Mount Vernon College. Obviously, not to the same world recognition, but it's really important that this company's DNA is to do innovative rethinkings of what we would call canonic works from the very beginning. And to me, it's personally very important because Peter Sellers is my mentor. And when I was looking for a way to return to America and a company where I thought I could do good work, it really stood out to me that this was a company that had a sort of parallel trajectory to where he as a director led the art form in America. So after 17 years of doing the concert series at Mount Vernon College, which is the name of the organization, George Washington University, Foggy Bottom, bought Mount Vernon College, and they decided it was not advantageous to them to have a concert series. So they disbanded the concert series, and they gave the in-series a parting, or it's still the concert series of Mount Vernon College, a parting gift of $20,000. And with that seed money, the in-series became its own 501c3 nonprofit and began its own independent life and changed its name from the concert series at Mount Vernon College to the in-series, which is a funny name, and we're going to talk some about that. But the reason it's called the in-series is because most of the reviews in those early days commented on our organization's productions as intimate, innovative, inexpensive. I prefer accessible, but inexpensive was the word they used. And so that's how we started calling ourselves the In series, the In for starting a lot of words. Just as a little parenthetical, when I accepted this job, a good friend of mine in Europe joked that approach to the word in could be a bit of a double-sided sword, because I could do a whole program of works from the European continent and call the season Incontinent, which I haven't taken him up on that advice yet. So at the same time that In-Series was getting started at the Hand Chapel, of course, I was running around in diapers in West Virginia. And I started music at a very early age. I'm from Appalachia. No one in my family plays music or is artistic in that way, but they were very open to letting me try things that appealed to me. And I must have heard someone, I mean, to Monica's wonderful introduction, I actually heard someone playing the hammer dulcimer. That was the first instrument I remember, and thinking I'd like to do that. And instead I started on the piano, and it's taken 41 years to get back to the hammer dulcimer. But I started piano at an early age, and eventually went to study in Baltimore, where my mom's family is from, at Peabody Conservatory. And I studied composition. But while I was there, I got disenchanted a bit with the solitary nature of composition as a profession. It really requires you to be a bit in isolation, and to enjoy and to thrive in that space of being alone. And at the same time, I had a fairly major car accident and had to take several years off of my conservatory training. And I went to Europe for the first time. And being being a product of the 1980s, I wanted to see where the Phantom of the Opera had taken place. And at the time, you couldn't go on a tour of the Charles Garnier Theater. You could only buy a ticket to see a show. So I bought a ticket to see an opera by Rameau. I didn't really know what opera was. I certainly didn't know who Rameau was. I had a little box seat on the side, and from the moment the curtain went up, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. It was sort of instantaneous love of an art form and of that size of impact that opera can almost uniquely have over an audience. So when I went back to conservatory, I finished my degree in composition, but I started working as an assistant director. I worked one summer at our own Wolf Trap as an assistant director, and one day after rehearsal, the director who I was assisting for took me to lunch and said, "You're really terrible at this." And he was right. I hated being an assistant. I was no good at it. I spent the whole time thinking about how I would do it if I were the stage director. And he said, if you want a career in opera and you don't want to be an assistant, the only thing you can do is to start your own company. So I was living in Baltimore at the time, and I started a small company with a big name called American Opera Theater. And we had a very successful 10 years there. We were in residence at Georgetown. So we performed for our last 4 or 5 seasons, also at the Gonda Theater and the Davis Center at Georgetown. Throughout all of this, living in Baltimore, working in DC, I never heard of in-series. I moved to Europe. I worked as a freelance director. I ran some young artists programs, as Monica mentioned, and it wasn't long into my stint in Europe that I began to realize that even though I now had big budgets and I was working in big theaters with pieces that I could never do in a small theater, I really missed the size, the scope, and the amount of control I could have on the artistic product in a small company. So within 2 years of living in Europe, I knew I wanted to come back and work in my own country. I missed America. I missed being part of the messiness that's America and sort of being a part of the conversation in my own country. And I missed having my own company. It took another 10 years to find the right opportunity to come back and the right company to work for. And finally, of course, that was in-series. And what attracted me to in-series was that legacy of doing the unconventional that Carla had already baked into its bones, and this sort of undiscovered raw potential in the organization to do great things and to do them on a scale where they can be more effective. And I guess what I mean by that is that I think we've come to a time as a society, as a culture, where we realize that great impact isn't necessarily the result of large endeavors, that small endeavors can actually have great impact. Large impact can come from small endeavors. And when I started talking today, I said that what we are is an opera theater company. And I want to dig into a little bit of what that means. And I'm gonna give a little bit of a crash course in opera history. The word opera, as I'm sure most of you know, it comes from the Italian and it means work, as in a work. So in Italian, opera can be used to refer to the work of a builder or the work of the baker or the work of anyone. This is not the word that was originally used for the art form that we now call opera. Opera was invented, and I think that's important. It's one of the few art forms that we know the exact day, the exact hour of its invention. We know precisely when the first opera was. And it's at the end of the 16th century, and it's a group of wealthy lawyers, so wealthy they don't have to work, so they call themselves poets, and in Florence, and they have an academy, a club, and they decide they want to recreate Greek drama, what they imagined Greek drama would be. And to do this, they thought that the Greeks must have sung their drama. And they invented something called recitar cantando, which means singing speech. And they used this to stage what were originally mythological stories, the Orpheus, of course, or the myth of Ariadne was very popular. And they thought that this was a recreation of what the Greeks would have done. We now know that that's probably not the case. But I think that that's also important because the Greeks, of course, invented theater to have a social function, to be part of changing a society, to have a real, not to be entertainment, not to be something that is set alongside culture, but to be at the center of politics, of a community trying to improve itself. And when those Renaissance Florentines decided to invent opera, I think that they were inventing something that they also imagined as being a tool for making a better world, for making a better society. What they called it was drama per musica, which means theater through music, drama through music. And I think at that time, when opera slowly in the 17th century started getting applied to this art form, it was something that was that was open to possibility. Anything could be an opera. There were no strict rules about what was and what was not an opera. And at a certain point, in the middle of the 19th century, around 1860, particularly with the operas of Verdi, the art form codified but also calcified around a form which we now imagine in our mind's eye when we think of opera. There's a pit, there's a Puccini, and there's a conductor, there's a big orchestra down here, the singers up there that, you know, either are not fat, depending on which Looney Tunes we saw. And that has been how it's been for you know, 150 plus years. And at that same time, I think the word opera stopped being something that was about possibility and to be something that limited and became limiting to the art form. Something I loved about what Carla did was that she was working in forms that merged different genres and maybe would not have been considered opera at that time. And so when I joined in 2018, Interiors was mainly doing chamber operas, so these Mozart operas and other repertoire with a small orchestra or a piano, but generally in their more or less original form, even if they were reset into contemporary settings. Latinx programming, I said that Carla was a Chilean pianist. A lot of her contacts and relationships were in the Spanish-speaking community and the Latinx community. And so we did a lot of zarzuelas, but also a lot of songs, programs of song, cabarets of song from Latin America. And then the third pillar when I joined was the American Songbook. So what we would do musical evenings of Jerome Kern, of Victor Herbert, of Irving Berlin, celebrating what's classically called the American Songbook. And what was interesting to me when I took over was to say, what happens now if we start not siloing these three areas, but if we start trying to blend them together and give ourselves the opportunities to ask some interesting questions, like what happens when an opera is a cabaret? How can Latinx programming, how can this popular form of program actually be considered operatic? How can a cabaret actually also be a hard-hitting piece that's calling for social action or social justice in the way Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill's works did? How can spoken text and through composed music sit within each other and magnify the meaning of each other? And then in particular, I was interested in what is the American Songbook? Whose America do we mean when we talk about the American Songbook? And what other musics and other cultures and other histories can become part and be folded into the American Songbook, not at the exclusion of any other music, but actually blended together. And that's the journey we've been on since I joined. So what I thought I might do is talk you through some of the highlights of the last 3 seasons, including the one we're just coming near the end, this extraordinary pandemic year of 2020, 2021. And then also look at what we'll be doing next year, because I think, as is true for any arts space that we talk about, the proof is in the pudding. I can't really, if I could put what we do into words, then I wouldn't need the art to do it. So I'm going to show you some examples and come back and forth and tell you the story of the last 3 years. I mentioned earlier that there's this wonderful element of essence and accident going on, and a lot of the most important milestones in our organizational life in the last 3 years have been things that we would never have planned for had we thought had we not had them forced upon us. And the pandemic is the perfect and the greatest example of that. But one of these is that when I joined in 2018, Carla had a season which was half planned, and I was forced into a position of figuring out how to be true to my own artistic vision and to start crafting, shaping the company as I wanted it to be, and also honor the choices of repertoire and artists and collaborators that she had already chosen. She told me that our first show had to be Verdi. It didn't matter what Verdi, but it had to be Verdi, and some sort of a Verdi cabaret is what she had in mind, that singers at tables and there'd be highlights from different operas. That was very much not where I would have started, and it's also very much not, I don't really go in for opera potpourri performances. So I thought, oh, what can I do with Verdi? I called her many times to say, can't we do Mozart? No, it has to be Verdi. So eventually where I landed was, okay, well, let's not do any of the Requiem. No, let's not do any of the operas. Why don't we stage the Requiem? Which is a bit, an audacious way to start a tenure at a season, at a company. And I thought, well, what can I do with the Requiem? What do I know about Verdi that really interests me? And I thought, well, Verdi, late in life, gave all of his wealth, but also the future proceeds from all his operas to start a retirement community for aged singers in Milan, which is still active today. In fact, today they do this wonderful thing where it's also housing for conservatory students. So you have retired musicians living alongside young musicians in Milan. It's really wonderful. And that he always wanted to write a King Lear. King Lear is my favorite play. Verdi always wanted to write an opera based on it. He loved Shakespeare. He didn't, in the end, write an opera on it. So it's this great lost work that he never got to do. So what we did was try to make that piece. We used the Verdi Requiem with 8 singers and a piano, and and one actress, a wonderful local actress, who took the role of Verdi / King Lear / a woman named where's my brain? Margaret. It's not going to come to me. A Harvard professor of early modern theater, who has written a book on all of the Shakespeare plays. It's a book called Shakespeare After All, and there's a chapter on each play. And I originally went to that book to look at doing research for this piece, and in the end, I just couldn't do it any better than she had done it. So we just basically dramatized her nonfiction chapter on King Lear. So I'm just going to play a little clip of it now, and as we go through the 3 seasons, you'll see very much the style change, also in terms of the way we videoed things. So this is from my first season. I'll just play a little bit of it. Please give a shout if you can't hear. I think this should have shared the sound. In interest of time, I'll go on to another show that we did that season. There's a very famous zarzuela. If you don't know, zarzuela is a musical theater form from the Iberian diaspora, originating from Spain, though it's practiced a lot in South America, Latin America, and also in the Philippines. Even there's a form of zarzuela. One of my problems with the form of zarzuela is it tends to be very much about to be a bourgeois art form and to be about maintaining the status quo and not about seeking social change or social betterment. This was early 2018. So when we started to plan this, so the border wall had not become an issue at the time. I remembered a story from This American Life, if any of you know that radio program, about families that gather in Tijuana and San Diego each weekend at a place called Friendship Park, which is a place where families can meet across the border. And every Saturday there are weddings, there are masses, there are picnics held on both sides of the border so that families can be together. We took a very famous zarzuela that Carla had already programmed called La Verbena De La Paloma and set it at the US-Mexican border in Tijuana and in San Diego. And this is the preview of the piece, but one thing you'll notice in it is a wall or a copy of the Trump border wall that we built. And then we had students at the Latin American Youth Center in Columbia Heights decorate it with stories of their own immigrant experience. And the audience also got to design butterflies when they came or during intermission, and after each performance, those were added to the wall. So the piece itself changed over the evening. And we reorchestrated the music for something called a son jarocha band. Son jarocha is a style of music performed in this part of the US-Mexican border country, which is characterized by different sizes of guitars and is also used to drive social justice messages in those border communities. And there's one other piece I was gonna play, but in the interest of time, I'll just describe it to you. We ended that first season with something called the Tale of Zerse. You might know the Handel opera Zerse. you surely would know what most people know as Handel's Largo. I won't sing it for you to remind you, but it comes from this opera. And what we did was, this opera is set in Persia, or Handel's idea of what Persia was. It was about the ancient King Zerse. Handel, of course, knew nothing about Persia. So when we decided to stage the piece, we wanted to imagine how we could give the piece back to certain Persianness. And we instead broke the music of Handel's opera up and inserted poems by the ancient Persian poet Rumi in it. And that's an example of how we've started to experiment with how text and music can be blended together. So it's not opera. Opera has no speaking, and then there's theater, which has speaking and little music. But to try and blend those together, you could see in the Paloma example that I just showed how we're taking an art form that usually is about entertainment and trying to make it socially relevant in a new way. And then the Verdi, of course, really became emblematic of a lot of the work we do, which is to take works which you would never expect to see in a small theater done this way, and to do the most unimaginable thing we can do it, to insert a singer and to insert an actress and make she into King Lear and put these two works together that you don't usually see together. At the same time, we changed our name. We were the In Series. We became In Series. And if you remember how that video started, it had this, which was our old logo, and our old tagline was opera and more, which sort of indicates that there's opera and there's other stuff. We then became just In Series, and our new tagline is opera that speaks, theater that sings. We think that conveys not just the way we blend spoken text and sung text, but also that we make opera that is relevant, that is speaking to the issues of the day, and we make theater that is lyrical, theater that goes beyond just what language can do, because what opera really does is explore the places where language fails. In the next season, which was really my first season my first season that I had fully planned, we opened with a version of Puccini's Madame Butterfly that was simply called Butterfly, which was for 4 singers and a piano that was prepared. And what prepared piano means is you can pluck the string, sometimes you strum it with a wire brush, or you can put things in the piano to make it sound like a percussion instrument. I'll just play a tiny clip from this. The other thing the piece did was try to find a way. Butterfly is one of these pieces in the operatic canon that is challenging because of the way it deals with race. And opera companies around the world have been struggling with what to do with a piece like Butterfly. So our version of it tried to de-race it in a way. It was no longer about anything in the least Orientalist in the 19th century kind of way. I'll just play a tiny bit of this. So again, you can see there we're taking a work that is canonic, that is, the quintessential piece of operatic repertoire, but you would never expect to see it in a small theater of 100 people with just 4 singers and a piano. And that isn't making it less than it was originally, but is instead making it speak in a new way, making it mean something different and be equally, if not more powerful in a new way. In the same season, we created something called Stormy Weather, which was a version of Shakespeare's The Tempest that blended spoken text and sung text to explore the Tempest from the other side. The Tempest has these African characters who have no voice, like the witch Sycorax or her son Caliban in the original. So we made the piece Stormy Weather, which used the music of Billie Holiday and was rewritten by a local playwright named Sybil Roberts.
Soon, there was only darkness and salt water.
I'll just skip ahead so you can see.
Be in the darkness as the moon comes to rest between her thighs, and the promise of ancestors to come stains both our calves. I had not yet known my own moon or the mystery of the blood. I remember the pitch and howl of the sea gods. More prayers. Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificatur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua. I remember the ship sinking beneath the sea. I remember washing ashore. I remember the men coming to look for us. I remember hiding among the rocks.
I'm a little aware of time. What that scene builds into is the song Strange Fruit, which of course was Billie Holiday first recorded. Another piece we did this season that there's no recording of was something called L'Enfance de Christ, which is an oratorio by Hector Berlioz about the flight of the Holy Family from the Massacre of the Innocents into Egypt. We staged this as an immersive piece. This is actually where I first met Suzanne in Foundry United Methodist Church on 16th Street, and made it about migrant families fleeing persecution and seeking hospitality in a strange land. And the audience moved, part of the audience could move with the performers and travel through the sanctuary space throughout it. And I think it's actually one of the most special pieces and of which I'm most proud that we've done. And then, of course, all the rest of the season, we did a festival. I won't go too much detail into it. We did a festival of women composers in February of 2020. And then, as we all know, the global pandemic struck. We closed our offices March 16th of 2020. And by the first week of April, we had announced that we were going to be creating an all digital season. We didn't know how to do that. We had no idea, but we knew that we wanted to use pandemic as an opportunity to become a better organization, to do our work better. And we thought using digital technology, while not the ultimate path to the future, was a way that we could, a crucible or a refiner's fire, if you will, that we could improve the way we do a lot of the work that we do. And we created a streaming platform that we call InVision. And I'm going to take you on a quick tour of it. This is actually it. I'll show you. So this is our normal website. And then we built what we call a digital performing arts center called InVision. It's sponsored by Dan and Gloria Logan. So it's also called the Logan Opera House Without Walls. And when you go in here, there are several different venues, just as if you were to go to a performing arts center. There is the Odeon. This is our main stage space that contains all the content we've created that's more traditional, full-length operas like The Butterfly, etc. There's another space. It's a digital black box where we have more experimental work. We have a live studio. This is where if you want to do something like we're doing now, or to show a live performance where everyone could gather at the same time to watch it, you could watch it there. We have an education annex where we've made virtual field trips for school children, where we do a lot of learning content. We have a virtual lounge. So just like you leave the performance in the intermission to go have a drink, this is a place where audiences can gather to have conversations, where we can have artists and do artist talks, things like that. There's a backstage area that has bloopers and meet the artists, and a place where we honor the funders who made it possible. The only part of this website that costs any money is this backstage area. Everything else is completely free, which means we've done all of our performances this year for free. We've created almost 20 different film projects. I was going to show you some. We're running short on time, so I'll just click through them and tell you a little bit about them. This is a project based on that Zerse that we did a couple years ago. We did this project in the beginning of the pandemic, and what you see here is the chamber orchestra of the city of Tehran in Iran. And we did a performance where we had our singers all recording themselves at their own homes. I was playing the harpsichord in my apartment, and then it was sent to the orchestra in Tehran, who recorded themselves performing the piece, and we created a digital collaboration between Iranian orchestra and American musicians as a sign of friendship and peace. We created a trilogy of films on grief and loss. One of these is based on the Gluck Orpheus, which we made about the journey of a husband who has lost his wife. We filmed it in London with a husband and wife team who could be there and be quarantined together. And the second part of that trilogy was a film based on a Schumann song cycle called Frauenliebe and Lebe. I'll play just a little bit of this. This is the sort of work that we could never do in a normal season. It's about 35 minutes, so it's a little too short for people to come out to pay a full price ticket to go see an evening of theater. It's only 35 minutes. It also has no staging. It's just a woman sitting at a table and a man sitting at a table. And they have a conversation, him speaking, she singing about the end of life. But all of a sudden during COVID, this is exactly the sort of work that we could do and could do in a way that innovates our art form.
By December, I'll be glad to see the year coming to an end. I'll be looking forward to getting on with things. Nearly 12 months or so will have passed since Lisa died, and that will feel like an accomplishment. Someone will no doubt decide to have a one-year memorial party in Lisa's honor, because that's what Lisa would have wanted, and we'll leave a message on our answering machine with a time and date sounding all cheery and excited, but almost too cheery and too excited, because Lisa, after all, is dead. And for a moment, I'll feel like I have to go because, hey, it's for Lisa. But then I'll realize, you know what? It's been a year, all right? Why don't you all go to hell? And I'll tell my wife I don't want to go, and by this time, instead of the usual disappointment, she'll look at me and say, Christ, me neither. So we'll lie to everyone and say we're going away on vacation, even though we're not, and we'll just make sure to stay out of town for a few days so nobody sees us. Which is exactly what Lisa would have wanted.
Some of the other pieces we did this year, we created a virtual walking tour of DC sites that are part of the African American experience here, which we had a local tour guide pick sites that matched a recital program, and write a narrative about the history of all the sites. These are sites like the house of Mary McLeod Bethune, the True Reformers Hall where Duke Ellington had his first performances. And you can watch an actor walk through the U Street corridor visiting these sites accompanied by music and readings by great African-American writers and poets. For the election, we did a piece called the Gonzalez Cantata, which sets the transcript of the Alberto Gonzalez congressional hearings, if you remember those, in the style of a Handel oratorio, with all the gender splits. So the only man in the cast plays the role of Dianne Feinstein. And we also created a, if any of you remember the old Walter Reed Hospital, we created a piece called the Saga of King Herald, that So the Saga of King Herald is a 20-minute, even less, 15-minute opera. It's called a grand opera in 3 acts and an epilogue, with 1 soprano unaccompanied playing 9 roles in 15 minutes. And we staged it in the old power plant of the Walter Reed Hospital. It's been abandoned for years. 1 cameraman who was her boyfriend and me, so we were all protected. We filmed it in November of last year. It was really, this is again the sort of piece we would never normally be able to do because it's only 15 minutes long. What do we pair it with? But it makes a perfect short film, and was even featured this past week in the New York Times as an example of short opera, and how short opera is something that the critic hopes it will continue into the next season. All of this material and so much more, this is only scratching the surface of what we did this year, is available on this website. Before we stop, I'll put it in the chat, or I think it might have been in the email you were sent. Everything is free. Everything is accessible all the time. And as we go into next season, we're going to be continuing to do programming there. We're also going to be returning to live programming. Just this past week, we announced our season for next year. So you'll be one of the first groups to hear about it. And in the first half of the year, so that we can be cautious with how we expend resources, and also how we plan to open up, we're going to be doing live screenings of some of the film work we've done this year, but with live music. So in September, we'll do a whole weekend of pieces that deal with loss and grief and turning towards hope in the new season. So we'll do those 2 grief, the group Orfeo. We'll screen that, but with the husband and wife, we'll travel to DC for those performances to perform them. We'll do the Chronicle of a Life in Love, which was the Schumann song cycle. And then we'll do a 3rd one, which will be the film premiere, which is based on the works of Wagner, the 3rd act of his Tristan und Isolde, but staged as the story of a healthcare worker in 2020, becoming the spiritual guide at the end of the life for people who aren't able to be with their families. And we'll end that weekend with a live concert at the Sixth and I Synagogue of music of Bernstein and Mozart, celebrating a journey from grief into hope. Then in October, we will do the film premiere of an animated feature film of La Boheme, the most famous of all operas, translated into Spanish, set in 2020, and in Columbia Heights, which is the neighborhood I live in, and you all no doubt know, in Columbia Heights. It's been animated by 7 young high school and early college animators from Baltimore. And that'll be performed with live music and screened at Gala Hispanic Theater. And in December, we'll mount something called The Fairy Queen, which is Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, with music by Henry Purcell. We first produced that this year as a podcast opera. So it was a 4-episode podcast that you could listen to, with the orchestra coming from Amsterdam, the singers all over the world. I was in Baltimore with the singers. We'll be doing this at the Atlas Theater live as an old-fashioned radio show. It'll be hosted by Murray Horowitz. So if any of you listen to WAMU and the big broadcast, he'll be the narrator for this event with a Baroque orchestra and chorus, and the singers performing in the style of a classic radio drama with sound effects table. And then we'll return to fully staged live performances in the spring. In February, we're going to be doing John Adams' opera, or song play rather. I was looking at the ceiling and then I saw the sky, which is about the 1994 LA earthquake. And it's about a group of young people seeing past the limitations society has put on them to see possibility in their own future. In April, we'll be making our Kennedy Center debut with a world premiere of an opera called Zavala Zavala, that is about a real life story of families separated at the US-Mexican border. Something else we do at In Series is have a youth poetry competition for poets, young poets that write in English, Spanish, Portuguese, or any indigenous language of the Americas. And it's named for Gabriela Mistral, who was the first Latin American to win the Nobel Prize in the 1940s, Chilean poet. We'll be premiering a new work we're having written that sets her poems in translations by Langston Hughes. He was the major translator of the poetry of Gabriela Mistral. And then what I'm most excited about is that we will end the season with a 2-evening theater piece. The first night will be the Verdi Othello, and the second night will be Toni Morrison's play Desdemona, which tells the story of Desdemona in the afterlife, in conversation with the woman, the Black woman who raised her, about what has happened. And we'll be using the music of Nina Simone and collaborating with an artist named Maya Freeland, who is the daughter of Phil Freeland. And if any of you know the new Smithsonian Museum for African American History, he was the architect of that museum. She is an artist that makes these large quilt installations out of tissue paper, and the artist will be on stage making the quilt as the performance happens with the audience, so the piece will grow throughout all of that. And the last, and I think the most important thing I want to share with you is we're also starting a what will be the first in America, a young artist program, an emerging artist program for exceptional young singing activist artists of color, called the Caldwell Dawson Artist Fellowship. Mary Caldwell Dawson was a DC native who founded the National Negro Opera Company in the 1940s in Washington, DC. And we're starting this program, which will be a 4-year fellowship for artists to create their own work and to perform in our season, to honor her legacy and to obviously be part of dealing with inequity and great inequity that exists in the opera industry. Obviously, I thought that I had more time than I had. So I'm sorry, my friends, that I had to rush a bit through the last bit of that. Like I said, everything's online. You can watch it all. You can watch it all for free. We'd love you to let us know what you think and what you enjoyed. We'd love for you to join us next season. Everything is on our website, and subscriptions will come available in the summer, but we'll also be doing everything still streamed online for free next season as well. I know I've gone way over. I would love to open it up for any questions or thoughts. If Jonas says we have time for that.
We have a bit of time. I just want to say thank you very much from everyone at the Village. That was a fascinating talk, and it's certainly it's an interesting career path too that you took to get to where you are and to put on such spectacular shows. I wanted to quickly ask, this isn't important for now, but if you could send me some of those links and little notes on how to access them, I'm happy to put that in the post-event email that I send out with the YouTube recording. So I'm happy to share that to everybody to make sure people can view those at their own pace and take their time with them. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. We are just about an hour, so we can definitely squeeze in a couple quick questions. Questions or comments? I feel like it looks like Suzanne's trying to unmute herself there. Do you think one of the issues I always have with opera is the accessibility of it? Do you think that some of the programs you've done this year that have definitely increased accessibility will help sort of build people that have come and watched these half-hour things, do you think they'll stay to watch a longer 3 or 4 hour opera?
Obviously, that's the question, of course, we wrestle with all the time. I think it depends. We're doing some interesting things to try and make our performances more like larger experiences next season. So, for instance, for subscribers, they can choose to be part of different. So we'll have different styles of subscription. One of those is for people who want to be part of a learning experience. So Anne Majed, who was the former critic at the Washington Post, she'll be doing a book club with one session for each show, and people who subscribe get that book club as well as a pre-concert talk with me and a post-show thing too. For those people that want to go to the opera because they want to eat and drink, which there's a lot of those, we're going to have a resident sommelier who's doing a wine tasting that's paired with each show, and each show will be a collaboration with a local restaurant, which will curate a meal around the show. So we're trying to find ways to engage them that way. I mean, one thing we're very aware of is this year we normally reach about 6,000 people. This year we reached over 20,000 people in 34 countries around the world. So how do we make sure that we're still connecting with those folks throughout the year, and that we're still providing opportunities to for folks, you know, we have a huge following in Africa for some reason. How do we make sure that those folks are still able to participate and to be part of the journey? So that's the exploration we're doing now, to figure out how to stay accessible to the whole world.
Burke?
Where and how do you find your singers? Are they mostly locally based, or do you compete in the international opera world and schedule 3 years in advance? Or how do you find your singers?
It's a great question. So something Carla did really well and really passionate was to nurture what she called a family of artists. And they were proudly local artists. DC struggles in that it doesn't have a conservatory. You do get some University of Maryland students that stay around. Most of the Peabody folks move north. They move towards Philly and New York. So it's hard to get a group of singers that don't have to have a day job here. And day jobs make it hard for us to rehearse a show in a month. So what I started doing is saying that we will try to work with an even mix of outside artists, particularly international artists, and local artists, so that I think we serve our local artists better by giving them an opportunity to exchange music making and art making with international artists. And I, of course, have a lot of contacts in the international music scene that I'm able to leverage. So next season, for instance, we have a woman named Mcfadden. She's an American soprano, but she's been in Amsterdam for 40 years. Huge star in Europe. That because I knew her in Amsterdam, I've been able to beg, borrow, and steal to get her to come perform. And it'll be huge for our young artists to have the chance to work with her. The young artists are all local. So it's an even mix. And you're totally right. Opera plans 3 years, 5 years out. And that has limitations because people's voices change. So you've hired them to sing a role, and 5 years later, they may not be the best fit for that role. But it also, you know, allows you to plan far in advance. So it's something we wrestle with all the time is how do we live in a middle period where we're still nimble, but we're also able to make plans that we can deliver on.
Great. Do you want to say anything, Sam? But I definitely just want to say thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. And I hope many of the people here go online and check out the offerings and hopefully stay engaged.
Well, thank you guys. I'm so honored to have gotten to join you all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this, Tim. I have been a